Thank you all. I'm Mar Gonzalez Franco from Microsoft Research, and I will present the self-avatar follower effect in virtual reality. I want to start with some background. This work is rooted on the embodiment illusion. This is normally when we have direct control agency of an avatar that is in first-person perspective. We experience embodiment. This is kind of like a one-to-one substitution of our body. We look down, our body is an avatar now. Research has shown that embodiment can alter motor behavior in different ways. I will talk a little bit about the different ways we've seen. And there's some common mechanisms that underlie all these motor compensations, and we're trying to find out what it is. That's how we present, and we ended up working on figuring out this follower effect. So the first one is motion retargeting. Is a very clear example of a motor compensation. It's very visually driven. It's a visual feedback component. During the motor action, we see the avatar going in a different direction, and we compensate. And that is used to reach targets that are maybe haptic targets that are on the space. So let's see here, for example, a person is going to reach for the green target. The yellow, the red controller is the one he is actually seeing, and as you can see, the white one is what he is actually performing. So there is a compensation clearly there on this rewrap of the space. Let's see it again towards the green, but he's actually going straight forward. So another example of motor compensation would be this idea of motor contagion, where the avatar motions influence your own. So you're performing an action, painting with a pen on straight lines, but as you're painting, you see the avatar is drawing a circle. And if you can see on the right of the video, there is the actual drawing of the person. It's looking more and more like a circle rather than a straight line. So here we can see that the motor performance was strongly attracted towards what was seen rather than performed. So the avatar was very strong in like a magnet. And this was not found from that previous work by Burin, was not found to happen when you were not embodied in first-person perspective. Another example is the mimicry effect. The mimicry effect is a bit more upper level. We know that mimicry happens when we try to reduce outgroup effects or social exclusion, and it has to do a lot with human stereotypes. So in here, in this experiment that was done by Kilkenny et al., they found that when you were given an avatar and embodied in an avatar that was not task oriented, or like it was not consistent with the task, like wearing a dress or a suit for a drumming experiment, people would be less musical. So that's what they found. And it's also a motor behavior that changes with social norms. So that's more or less the whole, or there might be other examples, but it's kind of giving a way of thinking that, yeah, embodiment changes our motor performance. And that is because we're trying to fit into the avatar. This is a behavior that we're seeing consistent trend through VR experiments and setups. And even when people are given an avatar and that is completely static, they enter into this avatar and they try to change their posture and limbs to be aligned with the virtual body. Okay, so we've seen that in multiple experiments. So we kind of think that, yes, we have an implicit need to fill this spatial gap between the physical and the self-avatar bodies. whenever the system allows for that type of compensation. And that's what we call the self-avatar follower effect. And it's kind of guided by this idea that our brain fills gaps and tries to minimize inconsistencies. And so we're gonna go a bit more into how we tested for this self-avatar effect that we've seen also in prior experiments. But now we wanna see, if we drift the avatar, will the participant try to compensate for real? So we put a simple task in which the person needs to reach from point 0 to point 1. And after the reaching, we drift the avatar into one direction. So what we do here is the avatar moves 30 degrees off. We remap it in a way that they can't keep continue moving from 0 to 1 where they are, and they'll see the avatar moving from 0 to 1 wherever the avatar is supposed to move. So there is a projection there. You don't really need to align to the avatar to be performing the action. So there is that freedom there. And this remapping allows you to see whether you need to drift or not to fit with the avatar, despite you can continue the task without realigning. So we do 3 conditions. One is an instantaneous condition in which we drift 30 degrees all of a sudden. The other one is a gradual drift. Little by little, you go drifting towards the side. And the other is no drift. You continue going from 0 to 1 all the time, and the avatar is also going from 0 to 1. I want to remind that you, as a participant, you don't need to drift. The avatar drifts, but you're fine. You don't need to. You can if you want. So what we want to see if they try to compensate. And we find that yes, they try to compensate. So here we have an overhead view of the reaching results. Each participant is in a different color. And here we can see clusters for each of the conditions and the hand positions P0 and P1. So what we see is when there is no drift, P0 and P1 stay more or less in these 2 spaces. When there is an instantaneous drift, yeah, people drift also. And when the drift is gradual, they keep drifting gradually. Let's aggregate this data to try to explore it a bit better. So what we find here is at point 1, where is the hand position for all of the participants at the different moments in time? Okay, so at the specific instant where the instantaneous drift happens, people correct, but there is still an underlying offset that people don't completely align with the avatar. Versus when they are doing the gradual condition, people realign very nicely to the avatar, much better than on the instantaneous. And this is a significant difference. So gradual compensation, it is easier than instantaneous compensation. And in fact, if the drift is too big, they just don't compensate fully. We also recorded the embodiment effect. We asked through a questionnaire. And we found that, of course, if there is no drift, they had the highest embodiment. We also found that the gradual drift had significantly higher embodiment than the instantaneous condition. Finally, we arrived to some conclusions. First, there are some automatic compensations that happen. In the self-avatar follower effect, we find that when the spatial offset is introduced between the real and the virtual body, we introduce compensations. The participant will reduce that spatial offset. We also found that the magnitude of the offset matters. The follower effect works much better if the offset is introduced gradually and if it's not very big. And also we found that this is a byproduct of embodiment. The follower effect is modulated by the degree of embodiment. The higher the embodiment, the stronger the need to fit into the avatar. We also explore a little bit how we could break the effect. First of all, with a constant offset. So if there is a constant offset between where the person is and the avatar is, you will not be able to overcome it with the follower effect because it's constant, and participants will reduce their embodiment. If the offset is very tiny, tiny enough that you cannot really perceive it, it might be okay though. The other thing that could happen is that you drop embodiment for whatever other reason. I'll show another reason now, but and that will drop the follower effect. If you don't have embodiment, you don't have the need to fit into the avatar. Finally, one example of dropping of embodiment would be a complete loss of agency, right? That happens when you have semantic violations, and I want to show this video here of an example of semantic violations that was published in this paper in Neuroimage. And this is, in some occasions, when the agency is utterly disrupted, there are some big errors on the avatar motions, the follower effect won't apply. So in here, you're performing a task following where the arrows say, the one in the middle, and all of a sudden the avatar goes in the complete opposite direction, like you saw just now. And that will disrupt the follower effect. There is nothing you can do there. I want to finalize by adding some discussion on why or how do we think that this follower effect works on the neuroscience side of things. First of all, it's clear that there is an internal conflict minimization that is happening, and this is aligned with current predictive coding accounts of body ownership illusions, which are more detailed in the paper, but there is this idea that there is a single unified body, and that's why you need to minimize these conflicts, right? We also think that is particularly an active strategy to minimize the visual proprioceptive concept. So not just an internal conflict minimization, but a visual proprioceptive conflict. And this arises from the spatial mismatch between the real and the virtual body. Again, this idea of a single cause theory. Finally, we want to be clear, it's not just a compensation of the motor control loop that happens like when you're doing retargeting. It's more of an internal multisensory mechanism, because here we can see that this happens even when you're not moving. When you have an avatar static that you enter and you want to fit in, right? You want to be aligned to that virtual body, and this is an internal mechanism that is rooted on multisensory processing rather than just on the motor control loop, and it's underlying every body ownership illusion. So those would be our main learnings, and I hope you enjoy the talk, and I'm ready for questions.